Hi everyone, welcome back to Spratt STEM Academy. Today is the first video in my video series on cranial nerves. So today we're going to be talking about cranial nerve 1, also known as the olfactory nerve. So here I have a template of the skull with the foramen. I'll have this in my description below. You can download it as a PDF and use it for drawing. I think this is a really helpful way to learn your cranial nerves, especially where they are anatomically. Let's just first talk about the name of cranial nerve 1. I'm going to refer to cranial nerve 1 as CN1, and typically when you talk about cranial nerves, you use Roman numerals, so if you're not used to that quite yet, I guess now is a good time for you to practice using it. But cranial nerve 1, so CN1, is known as the olfactory nerve. Let's do a little bit of labeling. For today's nerve, cranial nerve 1, we are going to be typically focused here, so that's where we will be doing all of our drawing. But before we do that, let's do some labeling. We are going to label this area here, which I'm going to highlight in blue. That is the cribriform plate. And we'll talk about it a little more once we draw the actual nerve. But for now, just know that this area here is the cribriform plate. It's not an actual foramen, or in other words, it's not exactly a hole, but it has foramina in it, so it just means that it has a bunch of little tiny holes for the nerve. So let's just draw this out. I'm going to use the color pink, draw sort of a bulbous structure, and then you're going to draw kind of this tube-looking structure. And then in the bulbous area, just draw a bunch of little tiny circles. And then coming out of those circles, draw these structures. And we're going to talk about what these structures are in just a moment. Okay, so if you can draw a circle and a line, you have drawn the olfactory nerve. And the olfactory nerve has two parts. It has the olfactory bulb. And then this lengthy part is the olfactory tract. So let's further talk about what we're seeing in this drawing. So we know that this is the olfactory nerve. That's all good and dandy. But is this whole thing the nerve? What exactly is happening here? So essentially, in this bulbous structure that we drew, these little, they look like little strings with arrows at the end. Those are going to be cell bodies that are sending axons that pierce through the cribriform plate, which we highlighted here. And they're piercing through the cribriform plate through all the little foramina, so the holes in the cribriform plate. And the axons, the target of the axons of the olfactory nerve is the mucosa of the nasal cavity. So when it goes to the cribriform plate, they're targeting the mucosa of the nasal cavity, and that is how we are able to smell things. So very, very important nerve. But let's just summarize this. We're going to make just kind of little bullet points over here. So olfactory nerve, we know that it's cranial nerve 1. All cranial nerves are going to have some sort of foramen that they go through. So the foramen for the olfactory nerve is going to be the cribriform plate. Now, even though the cribriform plate isn't necessarily a foramen, it has foramina in it in which those cell bodies and axon are piercing through to get to the nasal mucosa. So I hope that makes sense. The next thing we want to write is mode of innervation. So essentially, what kind of nerve is this? Basically, the mode of innervation is special sensory. When you hear the term special sensory, that should be a major red flag for that the nerve is doing something that relates to one of your senses. So the olfactory nerve, we know that it's special sensory for smell. And then the target, that's going to be your last kind of highlight. The target, so when we say target, we want to know the target of the nerve. So where is the nerve reaching in the skull? And so we already talked about this. Its target is the mucosa of the nasal cavity. Okay, So we've highlighted foramen, mode of innervation, and target. Let's do a quick review. Cranial nerve 1, olfactory nerve. Its foramen is a cribriform plate, but in reality, the olfactory bulb has cell bodies, which then have their axons going through the cribriform plate. And then those axons, the target of the axons is the mucosa of the nasal cavity, which would be about right here. And that is how we're able to smell. Mode of innervation for this nerve is special sensory, meaning that it is going to be integral in making sure that we are able to smell. Thank you so much for watching. This is Cranial Nerve 1, and I will see you in our next video.